your daily dose of TOK. So in these lessons we looked at the concept of bias. We started off, as always, with a flip activity where you were invited to watch one or two of these videos. We had a discussion in class then about the video that you watched for your flip homework learning activity. And those videos focused on misconceptions, prejudice and discrimination, superstitions and bias. So bias is all around us, and it's actually a natural part of being a human being, so don't beat yourself up too much if you are biased. Inevitably you are biased. The trick is recognising that you are, recognising when it's important that we challenge our biases, and recognising bias in other people's opinions, essays, research papers and studies, etc. So we just need to have that quick recap there about the difference between personal and shared knowledge. So personal knowledge is distinct from shared knowledge. Examples of personal knowledge would include your understanding of a specific theorem. Shared knowledge, that's not unique to individuals. So examples of shared knowledge would be the history of the Cold War. Of course, inevitably, as I'm talking to you, I'm a little bit confused about the exact difference between personal and shared knowledge, and that's perfectly natural because there is inevitably an overlap between them. So we looked at this Venn diagram here to consider where that overlap occurs between personal and shared knowledge. So in TOK we use common terms that are almost a vernacular part of our language, but they mean something very specific in TOK. So opinions, for example. Opinions are different from bias because opinions may not necessarily be biased. They may be correct, but it can be quite hard to unpick if opinions are correct or incorrect. And when we start adding in the concept there of shared knowledge, then perspectives. So from different perspectives in different cultural contexts, the same opinion may be less true, the same opinion may be completely false. So again, particularly when we look at the human sciences, context becomes really important. So that brings us on to the idea of perspectives, and they are different and they exist in situations where there is no clear standard. So as I was talking to you previously about opinions, you realised I started to fall into that trap myself. Consider these consider these a continuum, opinions through to perspectives. So I talked to you about the context of an opinion. When we start talking about the context of opinion, then we're verging into the territory of perspectives because there's no clear standard truth or untruth in those opinions when we start going down and thinking about the perspectives. Bias is not the same as a mistake. Bias is a special type of mistake, a systemic one. It has systems around it. So we went on to think specifically about systems, systemic bias, and there were some examples here. So pervasiveness, we looked at this movie. People have biases, they have opinions, depend on their historical context. So here in this example, we thought about opinions that somebody, a subject of the British Empire and a UK citizen. There's structural origins as well. So there's this very funny video actually here about poverty porn and charity theatre. So there are structural origins behind that. We are structured to think about things in particular ways. Unfortunately, one of those things is that there are structural origins to our attitudes, some people's attitudes towards Africa. The fact that Africa is used as a term almost as if it's a country, when it's not a country. It's a very diverse collection of more than 50 countries. One of the really risky ones here is the unconscious influences. So again, it comes around to perceptions. So we may not even be conscious that we are being biased. So there are some very concerning studies of teachers in the education system being unconsciously biased towards students from a certain ethnic group. And there are examples all the way through the service sector. Bias, unconscious bias that doctors have when treating their patients, depending on their patient's cultural background. The police as well, making quick heuristic-based decisions driven by their unconscious bias. And then furthermore, we considered the concept of perpetuation. So these are actually self-perpetuating. They're self-reinforcing, backed up by those structures, backed up by our culture. So these practices and bias reproduce themselves over time, and they can actually transmit from one generation to the next, almost as if they're being transmitted by DNA. So we really need to be aware of these biases. Like I said, everybody has bias. That is a perfectly normal part of being a human being. The trick is we need to be aware of the different types of biases and aware when we need to address the biases that we have in ourselves. So we went on then to think specifically about deviation and bias. So bias causes us to deviate from objectivity. It causes us to deviate from the truth. So it will affect our decision-making process. A lot of the time we're making decisions subconsciously on subconscious facts that we have in our head. They are actually not facts, they are factoids. Some of them are completely false. So it causes us to have that departure from objectivity. So again, we come back to this idea of systemic deviation. There is a system behind it. Biases are not just random or isolated occurrences. They occur as processes, they link up together, and they result in a consistent pattern of behaviour. And so that is really important. You might have come across systemic deviation when you start talking about common sense. Your common sense will be very different from somebody else's common sense. It depends on the culture, depends on your personality. And we talked a little bit then about statistical significance. So in statistics, the concept of statistical significance is closely related to that of a deviation from a data set. So we can actually start running statistical models and to determine the level of deviation any given group or population of people, any group of people or population of people, and the attitudes they had to things. You can actually run a statistical significance test on that to try to identify the degree to which a group of people or a person has bias. So we do come back to the importance of truth. We're getting into the sometimes ambiguous and risky territory of justified true beliefs. But TOK, we should always be pursuing the truth and understanding the processes that we can try to approach the truth and the limitations in any context that what we say can actually be true. A reminder that the natural sciences, the experimental sciences, are not actually empirical. A lot of people think they're empirical, but actually they are not. We can never be 100% certain of something, therefore they're not really empirical.